please. Our next speaker is Georgios. Georgios is a pragmatic engineer with over 12 years of experience working with startups. As the co-founder of Zero to MVP, he's built over 25 scalable systems. In his talk, Georgios will challenge front-end developers to think more like engineers and avoid sacrificing long-term goals for short-term gains. Ladies and gentlemen, give a warm welcome for Georgios.
Thank you so much. So, first of all, when my clicker works, which I tested 3 times and was working, but now it's not. Let's try that. Okay. So, first of all, if you would like to, ask some questions, please scan this QR code and put in the number at the bottom. And you can ask questions anytime. Hopefully, we'll have a few minutes at the end. Sorry, did everybody have time to scan this? So last night, I panicked because I couldn't find my presentation, believe it or not. I wrote this a few months ago, and I was looking in the folder where I have all my PowerPoints, and it wasn't there. I was like, I must have deleted it, or like I was looking through version control and like trash bins and all of that, and then I remembered that I wrote this originally in a JavaScript framework, and had forgotten about it. So after that, I switched to PowerPoint. I'm not sure what I'm supposed to learn from that experience. Still processing it. So, I like to ask this question, why are we here? And I like to ask it because oftentimes when we set out to do something, we make a plan, and then we start going in that direction that we thought is the direction we should be going. And along the way, things happen, and we kind of forget, why we went that way in the first place or where we're trying to go. And in my mind, I'm sure you've all studied Homer in history. I think this is the best example of that, right? So Homer, this poor guy, Odysseus, this poor guy was trying to go from Troy back home, which is where 16 is, and he ended up doing all that. And I don't know how many times in the story, he stopped to say, well, why am I here? How did I get here, and where should I be going? By the way, history quiz. Does anybody remember why he was, he ended up doing all this? Like, what was the reason for this, bad trip? Just raise your hand. Okay, no one? Go. Well, yeah, he was trying to go back to his wife, but why did he make such a big detour? Why was his trip extended for so long? Why wasn't it a straight line? So the reason was hubris, right? The exaggerated pride or self-confidence. He pissed off the gods. That's what the ancient Greeks believed. So they put in all these challenges that made him, spend 30 years or something like that in the sea. So when I think about our kind of developer psychology, I think about this, right? We get excited by something, we go, yeah, this is amazing, And then a few months later, it's like, oh my God, this is so terrible. Like, when is the next thing coming out? And my journey here, I started in about 2010, and I had to write a small web application and a workflow with SMS. Like, smartphones were not a thing just yet. And I was a .NET guy, so I learned ASP.NET MVC. And that's where for those of you who haven't, by the way, actually, let's do another small quiz. How many people are front-end developers here? Okay. How many are full stack? Back-end only. All right. React? Okay. AngularJS? All right, a few people. Vue.js? Anything else? No? Anybody wrote in jQuery back in the day? Wow, yay. So MVC was where you wrote some HTML and you said, oh, just put this data here, and the server just served that to the browser. and then you added some JavaScript for seasoning, right? It was the exotic thing to do at the time, and we mostly used jQuery. And then 2012, I had to take this really big application that was monkey patched for 7 years, which means that the people who created the application had no money to invest in new features, so they were only fixing bugs with the minimum amount of work required. And I had to take that and kind of reimagine it as an architecture and as an application, as a whole application, and I had a small team of mostly junior developers. I mean, I was junior myself, and we had to rewrite it. So AngularJS was coming out at the time. We tried Knockout.js, if anybody remembers that. That was a disaster. And then AngularJS was like 1.0 beta 1, and we used that. And in that project, I rewrote it 3 times. I'm not exaggerating. Just the environment was that, I was in a startup, my boss was really busy, and he was only interested in seeing things come out, and I was kind of releasing things as I was rewriting this 3 times. So that's a luxury that we don't normally have. And then 2015, I switched, I go to another place, another startup. AngularJS was officially dead, as in Google had announced that they're not going to continue it, and 2.0 just took them really, really long. And for a time, I pretended that it was stable. It wasn't, and I just went back to MVC for a time. And then, the next thing in 2017, Angular 2.0 was still like beta 148 or something like that. And I just lost my patience. I was like, I really need to try this React thing. When I first looked at JSX, I was like, oh my God, my eyes. But I got used to it with time, and of course I started with Redux. That didn't last very long. I hated Redux, and then I went to MobX, which is another state manager. It's still kind of out there somewhere. And by 2019, I started writing mobile apps, so I used React Native. And as I was preparing this talk, I wondered, how did the interest with something as old as jQuery versus something as new as React changed over time? And you can see, there's an inflection point around, I don't know, 2018 or something like that, where the 2 lines crossed, and then React has been quite stable in the last few years, and jQuery has been declining, but it's kind of also stable, right? So it's still being used, and there is still some interest there. So then I said, okay, so that's, if we compare the two, what if we compare React, people who hate React with people who love React? How does that compare? And here we go, this is the chart. And as you can see, it's very conspicuous, like all the peaks match, right? So my guess is, and of course we don't really have data about this, but my guess is that on every release, there were just people who hated, what came out, and just people who loved it. But the numbers are very, very similar in growth, right? That's the interesting thing for me here. What about jQuery? Well, kind of similar. Look at the beginning, right? So the 2 things grow together. There's a lot of hate at where that red crosses the blue. I'm not sure what that was about. I'd love to find out. And then if we go back, if we look at the sort of recent part of the graph, you can see that it's about 50-50, let's say. So in all these years, we've done a lot of progress, right? So we started by rendering the whole page, and then serving that to the browser, and the browser would render it. And then we had partial page server rendering. So when I did the MVC, you could write partials, so you could say, this part of the page is a nice thing on its own, and I can just ask the server to re-render that part and then replace it on the client. and then kind of React and all those, and AngularJS, well, AngularJS before React came out, and they said, well, let's just put everything on the client. That seems like a good idea. And then the internet got really slow. Well, you guys might not know it because you all have fast computers and fast phones and fast internet, but everybody else kind of noticed. And then, we have meta frameworks like Next.js, and we said, okay, we'll just render everything on the server, but then we'll hydrate it on the client so that we have all our event handlers and so on. And then finally, we said, oh, we can kind of mix and match. We have components that can be rendered on the server or in the client, and with RSC and all of that. So really, we took an old concept and we just made it work in a different way. So, is that progress? I don't know, but what I can tell you is that this hasn't changed. And what am I talking about? This is just a random React example from the internet. It just fetches some data, does some error handling, loading state, transformation on the data, and so on, right? Just really typical stuff. What hasn't changed, I think, is that there's a lot of code soup. And what do I mean by code soup? This is another code example from the days of jQuery, and I think the author was making the point that jQuery code looks like soup because it looks like this. And what do I mean by soup? By soup, I mean that once you mix the ingredients, it's really hard to separate them again, right? In contrast with this kind of thing. This is a disassembled BMW N63 engine. I don't know where it's used, but looks amazing, right? You have all these components that each one does its own thing, has its own specification, is designed to fit with other components, and you can just lay out all the parts, very neatly like this, and then put them back together, and it will still work. By the way, how many people here would say when someone asks you, what do you do, they will say front-end engineer and not developer? Maybe 1 or 2 people, okay? 3, I think. So this makes me laugh because we like to be kind of we like to make negative comments about other people's codes mainly. I mean we never criticize our own code. Our code is awesome, and usually the criticism is not, man, that code was soup. It's more like, oh my God, they're still using jQuery. Like you see that guy over there, like he's still on jQuery. He's not using React or anything. And to me, it's like hooliganism, right? Because in those days, in that environment, it doesn't matter who is on the other side. You just want your side to win and the other side to lose. And very often we play this blame game, right? It's not my fault. It's NPM's fault or jQuery's fault or whatever it is that we are hating at that time. Webpack, I see jumping out on the list. When Webpack, came out, everybody was, it's amazing. If you look at, Webpack articles now that we have all these other non-Webpack things, it's like, oh, it's terrible. Meanwhile, in userland, the users don't really care about any of that. Because they can't experience progress, right? We think we've made progress, but the users don't think we've made progress. And I don't have any data. This is just my, my own opinion. But some of them would also say that things got worse because, the bundle size exploded and things were, slower and so on and so forth. And in all those years, we've blown up through several budgets trying to migrate our code base from AngularJS 1 to React, or from class components to hooks, or whatever it is the latest thing was, now to server components. And we're always waiting for the next framework messiah, right? What is the next thing? What is the next feature that's going to make our job? I was listening to the talk before that we're all so unhappy with our jobs. Those are terrible jobs. What is the next framework that's really going to change things and make us happy? And I included this because I thought it was one of those points in my career where I didn't really know what I was doing, but I had this kind of moment of clarity, and it stayed with me. And this is back when I was rewriting that very old and big application back in 2012, I think. So this was us in 13 when we were getting close to the release, when it suddenly kind of dawned on us that, oh my God, we're going to replace this website, right? The whole thing is going to be new. And even if the migration works 100%, there's no errors, there's no flood of exceptions coming out of Sentry or whatever, the user is going to visit one day and see this one thing, and then the next day they're going to visit and see this other thing. I'm like, is that good? Like, should we prepare them somehow? So I went and asked this question and got some really interesting responses. So, check it out if you're interested. And I think it all comes down to this graph, right? So our interest for React has exploded, but in all those years, our interest in clean code hasn't changed, right? I think that's backwards. So I'm just quoting someone from Hacker News who I thought was, said it very nicely. It's not really a framework or no framework problem, but a problem on how to keep an application code base healthy in a world of ever-changing features, developers, frameworks, and technologies. So how many times, we've taken over some code by someone who left the company or is just sick, and we're like, oh, what is going on here? Right? That's the kind of thing that we need to be changing, not necessarily looking for React 20 or 25. And these are the hard things about our jobs, and I think we can be doing a better job with those. And one is discipline. How disciplined are we about the way we write code? And how well do we communicate with each other and ourselves, really? Because writing the code is the easy part. Thinking about the code and how it will be and how it's designed is the hard part. So communication to me is a mixture of documentation and organization. So can you just look at the source code and kind of understand what's going on? And of course, governance. How do we make decisions in our teams? Have we ever discussed that? When a new version of React or Next.js or whatever it is you're using comes out, do we have a sit down and discuss what's changed? Is that good for our project, bad for our project? Should we start using it now, in 6 months, or when? So then I looked and said, okay, so sorry about that. Why did we start using React? So I Googled, what are the benefits of React? There was no ChatGPT at the time, so I didn't ask it like that. And this website I found said, well, React has components, which I thought was really strange. Not that it has components, but that it was a first benefit of React. Reactivity, which means that we have some state or some events, and they change something, and then our displayed HTML changes with it. And then state management, which I also thought was strange because people did manage state before React. And then of course JSX, that was a true innovation with React. And again, this is the kind of criticism that comes up when you Google jQuery. That jQuery, because it doesn't have the component idea inside the framework, that it results in code like this, where you have a handler and all the logic is just in there. But actually, you can write code like this. Nothing's stopping you. jQuery never says anywhere you have to put all the code in the handler. And this is the same sort of project, right? So the difference is very stark. Again, another example, right? So someone made a speaker class, and it has components in, methods and data in there, and they're using it in a jQuery kind of way down here to make the code more maintainable. JSX is, again, it was an innovation, but it wasn't the first time that we had mix of data and HTML. We had template engines before that. This is one called Handlebars, and you can see down here how they're iterating over a list. And you can even use JSX without React. I think it's called, I can't remember what this library is called. I think Bear JSX or something like that. And it allows you to use JSX with jQuery or anything else you want to use. State management, we had that long before React, and in Vanilla.js was just like that. You just define a variable, and that held your state. And that has evolved over time. So this is definitely not a React innovation. This is what it looked like in jQuery. You had this data function where you could have a key and a value. This is from the engine from Vue.js called Piña. I think that's how it's pronounced. And again, you can define an isolated component which manages all the state, and then you do stuff with it in your project. Svelte, I think that's how it's pronounced, kind of uses that. So you just, again, define some variables, but you add the export. And what about reactivity? Again, this is an observable implementation in jQuery where you can respond to things happening to a value. This is another project called OnChange, same concept. So these are things that we gain from using a framework, but what are the things that we lose by using a framework? The first is that the framework calls your code. You don't call the framework, right? So that has a set of advantages and disadvantages. And someone else is driving the roadmap. You're not in full, complete control over what happens with your project. Because you can't stop React at 18 or 19. And in fact, many projects nowadays, because they don't have the resources to maintain the previous version for another 10 years, there's projects that end up using very old versions of frameworks because they also don't have the money to upgrade. And that's, that can be a terrible thing. If you get an issue with something inside the framework, good luck debugging that. I hope you never have to experience it. And usually, really, if we're honest about it, frameworks optimize our experience, not the user's experience, which is something we need to be paying more attention to. So frameworks become a permanent crutch, right? We're always depending on the framework, whatever the framework is at the time, to tell us how we should be writing code. So here are some principles that you can take away from this talk that will maybe help you, become a better developer. First of all, your tendencies are yours, and it doesn't matter which framework you go to, they will still, you will still make the same mistakes. It's kind of like, that relationship thing. The grass is always greener on the other side. So, we are, our ex-boyfriend or girlfriend, had a something was happening, and it was their fault, and then we go to the next person, and then the same thing still is happening because it has to do more with us than with them. This is something that we don't discuss enough. I think that context is king, right? What is this thing that we're writing, for whom, and when? All these things matter in how we design our code. And we should be serving always the outcomes of our users and the company we work for. And we should all feel like we're on the same team, right? We're all trying to achieve the same thing. But what happens in practice is that sometimes, again, we stand on two sides. Oh, it's the developers and the users, the business people and the tech people. This is a big one if you're just starting out in your career. I've seen even senior developers just sit down and start writing code. That's not the idea. You have to think, when we say design, it means that we just spend some time thinking about what we're going to write before writing it. And this is a comment that I think is relevant also to what's happening with AI right now, that outsourcing your thinking always ends badly, whether that's outsourcing it to the framework or outsourcing it to a tool like AI. So in my opinion, the best framework, before someone asks, I'm sure someone will ask, is the one where you can consistently deliver value and you know what's going on, right? Those are the two most important things. And this is just another very interesting thread that I found on Reddit, where someone was complaining that I'm not going to go to any project that is using, like a legacy, like a React 16. Like, who uses that anymore? We're at 19. And there's a very, cool response that said, well, I don't care about the framework version. I care about delivering value to the users, right? That's what gets me excited, not working in the latest thing. And I think we can all learn from that response. Our job, I have a slide about that. I won't say it yet. It's really easier for a company to throw money at a problem than to throw more brains at it, right? And what do I mean by that? I mean that we are all replaceable if we don't think for ourselves in our jobs, right? Because AI will come and it can write boilerplate. We don't need a human to do that. Those jobs will get replaced, but it cannot replace the thinking, the real, questions and thinking about how we should do things so that it's better. And this is a quote I got from Uncle Bob. I'm sure you guys know Uncle Bob. Everybody knows Uncle Bob? All right, so he's he's someone who's been in the software industry for a very long time and has written several books and clean code books and many others, but someone well respected. And he says, never buy magic before you commit to a framework. Make sure that if you needed to, you could write it. You could write that framework so you understand what it's doing. And you can do this by actually trying it, right? So could I write a version of, a small version of React if I really wanted? And then you can decide, if that framework is taken away, can you live without it? Is it worth getting into it? So this is a slide I was talking about. Our job, in my opinion, is defined by delivering value and building predictable systems. That's what we get paid for, not writing code. And I will leave you with just a story that hopefully will help you understand that we're not the only people kind of behaving like this. So I really wanted to learn how to drive a superbike, so I bought one and I went to school. And in the school, when you go to, there's a series of 4 levels of lessons, and each level has its own set of exercises. And there are people there who guide us through the exercises. And on the first level, of course, and the second level, the exercises are quite simple because it takes more time to actually integrate the behavior than understanding the exercise. And then on the breaks, the time we had between each session, the conversation with many of the other students was like, oh, you know that technique that Rossi uses when he's on a turn and he brakes but also accelerates. Everybody wanted to go really fast and do the things that the masters who had spent 20 years on the field were doing, but that's not realistic, right? We have to go through all the basic exercises, all the boring little things that we think is boring, but that will actually make us better in order to become better. We can't just skip the levels and pretend we're Rossi because we added some speed to our turn. And before we go to questions, I would like to introduce a project that we're building called State of Health. And it's basically a survey, like how we have the Stack Overflow survey, where we have all this data about the salaries that we get in our industry, and the popularity of frameworks and all of that. This is a project where we invite you guys to come and answer some questions about issues you may have that are due to your work, physical issues, like back pain and those kinds of things, and try and gather some data and raise some awareness about that we all have these issues, and then maybe we should start talking about them and doing something about it. So if you're interested, please visit this webpage, and you can just put in your email, and we'll let you know when the survey is open. And if you would like to follow me, that's the QR code on the right for my LinkedIn. Let's see if we have any questions.
Thank you, Georgios. Sorry, we're going out of time a bit, but if you have any questions, please approach Georgios after the talk and ask him directly. Sorry about that, and thank you, Georgios.
Thank you.